Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're tackling a massive systemic flaw in how our industry handles compliance and due diligence. We call it the language blind spot. Look, if you're working in due diligence, you're probably used to running everything through English-centric tools, right? Mainstream financial media, global databases, on-chain analytics, English forms. But what actually happens when the project is driven by a non-native English-speaking team? Well, that standard operating procedure, it completely falls apart. To show you exactly how this goes down, we're going to walk through a fictional but highly realistic case study that we're calling Project Z. Now, everything about this case is made up, the names, the numbers, but every single compliance failure we're about to unpack is pulled straight from the realities of the industry.
So picture this. You're an analyst on a compliance team, and Project Z lands right on your desk. It's deployed on an emerging Layer 1 blockchain run by a local team out of Southeast Asia, but registered in a totally different jurisdiction. You open their pitch deck, and honestly, it's flawless. The CEO claims to be a former VP at a major fintech division of a top local e-commerce giant. The CTO is touted as a senior researcher at a premier AI lab. They've got an official grant from the blockchain's foundation, backing from a massive local gaming guild, and dual signatures from two globally recognized audit firms. Total value locked is in the millions, they've got thousands of wallet addresses, and they're gearing up for a token generation event with a fully diluted valuation in the tens of millions. And here's the kicker. If you run your standard English due diligence, everything checks out. Global databases verify the funding, on-chain platforms track them, English on forms have zero negative hits, absolutely zero. It looks like a pristine, incredibly safe project.
You've built up this really solid evidence chain, right? Medium to high risk, typical for early stages, sure, but with a perfectly clean team background. But then comes the plot twist. Imagine another due diligence team hands you a supplementary report, but this one was run entirely in the team's native language. When you pass that exact same project through its local language ecosystem, that perfect illusion completely shatters. Everything changes. You suddenly realize that by only doing an English language scan, you missed the real story entirely.
So why exactly does this English-only assumption fail so spectacularly? Well, it's a super common blind spot to just assume that English searches plus global databases equal the total sum of available information. But for projects dominated by local teams with a mature local media ecosystem, this fails for three very specific reasons. First up, local media often score these exclusive interviews where founders just casually drop details, like their actual education, former employers, or the real reasons they left a job. Stuff that never makes it into polished English PR. These are absolute fact goldmines. Second, local communities have their own anonymous forums and complaint hubs. English sentiment scanners literally cannot see them. And finally, perhaps most importantly, critical investigative journalism by local media, like say covering discriminatory policies by a local exchange, is almost never translated into English, yet it directly impacts local funding and listing paths. Relying on a single language isn't saving you time, it's actively omitting critical evidence.
Let's actually see how this plays out in our Project Z case study. When we dive into the native language data, we hit a very specific, very troubling number: 4. That's the number of distinct factual errors uncovered in Project Z's pitch deck, exposed entirely by native language media. By themselves, maybe they seem small, but stacked together, they paint a glaring picture of inadequate diligence or, honestly, intentional deception by the project team.
Let's play detective for a second and look at those 4 clues. Remember that deep dive local tech interview with the CEO I mentioned? Well, in it, he casually outlines his entire career path. Turns out, he wasn't a vice president at his previous fintech company. He stated, in his own words, that he was a senior product manager. That is a massive discrepancy from the pitch deck. Add to that the 3 other errors we caught. They actually only had 1 audit firm listed, not 2. The official nature of that foundation grant was heavily exaggerated. And get this, they even managed to misspell the CTO's former employer. So much for attention to detail, right? This brilliantly illustrates our core problem. You would never catch this lack of diligence if you only read the English materials. These errors prove the team either didn't check their compliance submissions or they purposefully dressed them up.
Now, I want to pause here for a second because there's this huge misconception in the compliance industry that local financial media is just, paid PR fluff with no real investigative value. But the CEO's own words prove that completely wrong. Mainstream local business media have strict editorial standards. They ask sharp questions and they leave in critical details. Just look at this quote from the CEO's local interview. "The project didn't get internal resources to continue, so I left to start my own." Okay, that is a highly neutral, borderline negative reason for leaving a company. If this were just a paid PR piece, an editor would have scrubbed that right out. The fact that it's still there proves this is serious journalism. It tells us that the BD materials falsely inflated the CEO's ability to mobilize resources at his last job. This context is pure gold, and English investors miss it entirely.
But hold on, because the local language investigation led us to an even deeper secret. And this one we verified on-chain. The CEO had a previous token project on another blockchain. Today, that token's price is a fraction of its all-time high. Zero trading volume. Delisted from all main exchanges. It has completely zeroed out. But in compliance, we have to be really careful to distinguish between two types of zeroing. On one side, you have malicious rug pull zeroing. That's where a team vanishes, liquidity gets strained, or there are open legal cases, bad actor stuff. On the other side, you have market failure zeroing. The project operated normally, no hacks, no vanishing acts, it just failed to find product market fit and died quietly. Our Project Z CEO's previous token? It was a clean market failure. No local forum complaints, no legal action whatsoever.
And this brings up a major flaw in how a lot of institutions score risk. Rigid internal scoring rules often just look at the word zeroed and blindly group all failed projects together into the highest risk category. They totally fail to separate a clean market failure from a malicious rug pull. Think about it. If you penalize a team that tried and failed cleanly the exact same way you penalize a team of literal scammers, your compliance granularity is failing to match industry reality. Basically, your risk assessment model is broken.
And the digging didn't stop there. Tracking the local narrative actually maps out a deeply concerning timeline. As we can see, this team didn't just have one failed project. They have a habit of serial rebranding, and the pace is accelerating. Their first pivot and rebrand took over a year. When that didn't work, the second pivot took just over 6 months. And now, merely a few months later, they're launching Project Z. Continuous, serial rebranding is a major, independent risk signal. It shows a team that's super accustomed to erasing their history, abandoning old token holders as sunk costs, and spinning up new narratives just to secure fresh funding. I mean, if you're valuing their new token at tens of millions, what happens when they rebrand again in 6 months? Who's left holding the bag? Most scoring systems don't even have a metric for rebrand resistance, but honestly, they absolutely should.
So, how do we actually fix this? Well, here is your ultimate actionable toolkit, a standard operating procedure for cross-lingual due diligence. Step 1 is your anchor. Identify the team's true native language. Look at where the founders worked, where they registered, and what language their media density is heaviest in. If it's not English, you must trigger a local language scan. Next, build out local media lists and dive into regional anonymous forums. And hey, quick tip, actually, scratch that, it's a critical rule. Don't just translate the word scam. Find the exact local slang for rug pull or fraud. Then, verify the on-chain data against that local public opinion. Remember, a quiet local forum doesn't mean safety if the on-chain data shows a dead token. From there, ruthlessly cross-check the pitch deck against local interviews to find discrepancies. Finally, employ a fact error counter. Tally up every verified error in their documents and use that total as a proxy for the team's governance and overall diligence.
This really brings us to a fundamental shift in how we need to view our jobs. True compliance is not about ticking boxes on a Know Your Customer form or filling out some AML questionnaire. Those are just tools, right? They aren't the whole job. True compliance is the management of information asymmetry. The project team holds all the real cards. Your job is to get as close to their reality as possible, usually with very limited time. Missing local language data fundamentally skews your entire valuation and risk model. It widens that asymmetry. Whether you're doing VC due diligence, M&A, or just basic background checks, if you ignore the native language, your picture is dangerously incomplete.
We've seen major compliance disasters in recent years that could have been entirely avoided if the teams had simply read the local news. Don't let your next retrospective happen just because you missed the obvious in another language. So the next time a non-English-centric project lands on your desk, before you even open your standard English tools, I want you to ask yourself this one provocative question. What is the true language anchor of this team, and have I actually reached the mainstream media of that language zone? The answer to that question is literally the difference between an airtight evaluation and flying completely blind. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep digging deep, and I'll catch you next time.